Instagram's free. When you download it, you don't pay for it. When you log on, you don't pay for it. Children don't pay a penny for it. So how does Meta make money when it's free? Well, the truth is, it's really not free. Meta takes something from users. When a child logs on, Meta takes that child's time. Meta takes that child's attention. Meta takes that child's personal information. When a child logs on to Instagram, Meta tracks everything that child does. It tracks what it looks at, what it reacts with, what it searches for, how long it's scrolling, what makes them stop scrolling. And it collects all that data. And when that child is not on Instagram, but it's on another app, it's also tracking them. And it's collecting their information about the searches they're doing on the internet and the games that they are playing. And Meta has all of this information about that child. And it creates a profile for that child. So how does Meta make money from that child? Well, what Meta does is it then sells advertisers the ability to reach that child and to target that child with advertisements from all the information and data it has on that child. This is the attention economy. Meta is in the business of capturing and keeping your attention and holding it for as long as possible so that it can show you as many ads as possible. It's more time equals more money. But getting or wanting a child's attention is a lot different than getting a child's attention. What makes a kid reach for a phone? What makes a kid keep scrolling and scrolling? What makes a kid go back to the app? To learn that, Meta had to understand how a young brain works. And that takes us to our first stop on the road. The science of addiction. And this is why children are uniquely vulnerable to addiction. This is the brain science that we'll show to you that Meta studied. And we're going to bring you this science by bringing an expert witness named Dr. Anna Lembke. She's the chief of Stanford University Addiction Clinic. She's a professor of addiction and medicine at Stanford. She's published over 150 peer-reviewed articles, many of them related to addiction. She's written books about the science of addiction. She travels the world, literally, speaking about the science of addiction and teaching the science of addiction. And she's going to do a much better job of explaining the science of addiction than I will right now, but I want to give you a little preview. And I would say that Dr. Lembke is going to give you 3 truths about the science of addiction that are important for this case. First truth has to do with dopamine, a chemical that is released in the brain. It's sometimes a chemical that's released in the brain when we experience something pleasurable or rewarding. Some of you have heard about that. And there's a whole system in our brains related to this dopamine reward pathway. When it's released, it makes you feel good. And then it makes your brain want more and more of it. And then it drives you to repeat the behavior. And the way addiction works, if it becomes addictive, the behavior or the substance, the more dopamine that is released, faster is what leads to addiction. And she'll tell you about that. And this brain right here is a child's brain that comes from the internal documents that you'll see. This is Meta's internal research, talking about dopamine releases and how they get children rewards. Second truth, intermittent variable rewards. Intermittent variable rewards. It's something that has been around. It's not a theory. It's science for a long time. And basically what it is for behavioral types of addictions, like gambling. If you really want to hook somebody, you got to make the rewards unpredictable. Your brain gets bored if the rewards are predictable. But unpredictable rewards get the brain really revved up. And so the concept is pretty easy. It has to do with why slot machines are so addictive. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And if you see people at the slot machine pulling the levers a lot, that sort of thing, you know they lose a lot more than they win. But it's that chance of winning, that reward, that dopamine reward that keeps them coming back and pulling and pulling. The third truth about the science of addiction that is obviously very important to this case is that adolescents, children, are way more susceptible to addiction than adults. What's the reason? It's more brain science. Plain and simple, a child's brain is underdeveloped. And if you see here on the right side of the brain, the lower part of the brain, the gray part of the brain, that's the part of the brain that develops young in a child's life, that gives us aggression and impulses and makes us emotional. A lot of times that's referred to like the gas pedal of the brain because it's go, go, go. And that's what makes children chase these rewards and these dopamine hits so much. But the front part of the brain, the pink part of the brain, that doesn't develop until much later. That's the prefrontal cortex. And it's a work in progress for young people literally until we're 25 or 26 years old. That's the brakes in the brain. That's what gives us good decision making. That's what gives us logical thinking and self-control. So children have the gas pedal, but they don't have the brakes. They simply don't have the hardware to make good decisions, to have good judgment, to exercise self-control. And whereas an adult might be able to say, stop, enough is enough, because of a child's underdeveloped brain, they don't have that ability. And that's what makes them so much more susceptible to addiction. Now there's one more truth I will say. I said there was three. Really, there's one more truth. And that is, children seek social validation. It's the way their brains are wired. They want so badly for their peers to like them. They seek social acceptance and approval so bad. And so if there are activities or things that can give them that peer approval and acceptance, they chase that intensely. And that's very important in this case because Meta leaned very heavily into this science. That's the end of the first stop. That takes us to the second stop, Instagram's addictive design. And this is the stop where I preview the evidence for you that proves that Instagram is designed in a way that exploits children's vulnerabilities and keeps them scrolling and scrolling, creates compulsive use, excessive use, and it makes them act in an addictive-like manner. So how does Meta do it? Well, we went to their files, and here's what we found. Meta uses dark patterns and addictive-like features. These are Meta's own words from documents you'll see. And let me define dark patterns. Dark patterns are interactions that are deceptive or that trick you into doing something you didn't want to do. These include misleading or manipulative features or settings. So dark patterns are manipulative. They trick you and they're deceptive. Addictive-like features are design elements that promote repeated or poorly regulated behaviors that may have a negative impact on the individual over time. Addictive-like features are the ones that are promoting the repeating behaviors, the coming back continuously, the scrolling, repeating those, but they may have a negative impact on individuals as a result. Let's look at some of these features on Instagram that they use to become addictive-like and that are dark patterns. Infinite scroll, no stopping point ever. Children just scroll and scroll and scroll. The feed never ends. There's always more, so there's never a natural place to stop. Endless supply of dopamine hits. And you may hear from this man, I hope, at this trial. His name is Asa Raskin. He's one of the inventors of infinite scroll. And he'll tell you that infinite scroll is a deliberate removal of stopping cues. It's because when you do that, it sort of makes your brain go to sleep. And he'll talk about this thing called doom scrolling. And he'll also tell you how he deeply regrets being one of the inventors of infinite scroll, because he'll say and tell you it's being misused for uses it wasn't intended by social media companies, and children across the country are being harmed. Autoplay, no decision required. This is just the video, not having to tap it. It just starts automatically. Videos, reels, stories, all move forward automatically, so the child's brain never gets a break from chasing the next reward. Social validation metrics, that's what you'll hear them called by Meta, inside Meta. These are the likes and the comments and the followers. Unpredictable rewards to children that give them dopamine hits. And these children chase these and compete for as many as they can get. They want more likes, they want more followers, they want more comments. This keeps children craving, waiting, and checking. It exploits their desire for peer approval. That's the brain science we talked about. Meta calls these first three, you'll see in the evidence, addictive-like and dark patterns. Notifications. These are what Meta uses to pull the children back to the app, to Instagram. This is a very sophisticated system, carefully timed. Unpredictable rewards trigger dopamine hits, and it exploits the desire for peer approval. Disappearing content. Sometimes it's called ephemeral content. This is like, for example, stories on Instagram that vanish in 24 hours. This exploits children's fear of missing out. If you don't look now, it's gone forever. Children feel like they need to consistently come back and look and check, waiting, craving, checking to get those dopamine hits. And the algorithm. The algorithm, which is a fire hose of intermittent rewards. This is really the engine behind it. It collects information about every child, learns what each child reacts to, and serves them more of it to keep them scrolling as long as possible. Every one of these features is designed to maximize a child's time on the app. They work individually, but they all work in unison to exploit children. And they're addictive-like features and they're dark pattern features that exploit children's weaknesses. The evidence will also show that there's one purpose for these, and that is to maximize the time a child spends on Instagram and to maximize profits. Now, I've explained it to you, and you don't need to rely on me. I want to look at some internal documents that you'll see in this case. Before I get to this one, I want to talk about, I actually have it here. This is going to be PX. PX is plaintiff exhibit, and they're going to be DX. PX 00029. This is a document from 2017, nearly 10 years ago. It's an internal document that has never seen the light of day before this. And it's talking about children. It's talking about youth. And the product managers in this document are concerned about children's well-being. and they're concerned about the design of the features, many of the features we just talked about, that they're exploiting the weakness of children. They're exploiting the insecurity of children. They're giving a dopamine rush, and the reason for that is because they want to keep the children on the document, or excuse me, on the app for as long as possible. In this document, the product managers, they ask the company to warn the public. It's a little hard to read, so we blew it up. Concerns related to well-being. Product features that are designed to exploit insecurity or provide a dopamine rush, that's the brain science, likes, notification, the pull down to see, the infinite scroll, etc., to increase time spent are inherently at odds with well-being and take away from people's ability to consciously focus on activities that add value to their lives. Nearly 10 years ago, their words. And they go further. Because our product exploits weaknesses in the human psychology to promote product engagement and time spent, if we are committed to the well-being of individuals, we need to alert people to the effect the product has on their brain. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this goes to the heart of our case. I'm going to talk a lot during this opening about things that Meta said to the public and things that Meta never said to the public. And this is one of the most important things. This warning never came. It's nearly 10 years now. The warning has never come, and they're going to deny it in this courtroom. I want to show you another document. PX0030. This is 2018, so this is 8 years ago. It comes from the Meta files in this lawsuit. This document's titled Addiction, Problematic Use, Design Audit. And what's happening here is Meta researchers are evaluating the features that they use, like infinite scroll and the other features we talked about. And then they're concerned that they're harming people. And then they categorize them into dark patterns or whether or not they're addictive. Here's how they define dark patterns. It's a UX term, user research term, referring to interactions that are deceptive or that trick you into doing something you didn't want to do. These include misleading or manipulative features or settings. And then they define addictive-like design elements are those that promote repeated or poorly regulated behaviors that may have a negative impact on the individual over time. Their words in their document 8 years ago. This has never seen the light of day. And then they go so far as to they categorize their features. Many of the features we talked about. They write this diagram. Some people call it a Venn diagram. And on the left, you see dark patterns. That's the left oval. And on the right, you see addictive-like design. And then in the middle, you see features that are both addictive-like and dark patterns, like autoplay, like endless scroll, and notifications. These are things that are deceptive, according to their definitions. They're manipulative, and they promote these repeated behaviors over and over and over again. And the evidence will be that Meta will deny this, that their features are addictive at all. They'll tell you that they're fun. They're so fun for kids. That's why kids spend so much time on them. Here's another document. This is a 123-page research document. It's PX00037. This was research that was done by Shaylee Jimenez, and you'll get to hear her by video, her deposition. She was on the growth, or is, on the growth team at Meta and the Instagram growth team. That's the team responsible for growing Instagram, getting more kids to join and to spend more time. And she did extensive research on teens. In fact, I think she says in her deposition, she was the expert researcher on teens, trying to determine how to get them to come back to the app more often, what they like, how we could give them more rewards, and things like that. And this is her report she presented to the executives at Instagram to discuss attracting and keeping teens on Instagram. And that's the brain I showed you. It comes from this presentation. So let's see what she says. Every time one of our teen users finds something unexpected, their brains deliver them a dopamine hit. That's the brain science. Teens are insatiable when it comes to feel-good dopamine hits. And she goes further. Teen brains are much more sensitive to dopamine. One of the reasons that the risk of drug addiction is higher for adolescents and keeps them scrolling and scrolling. To be clear, she's equating drug addiction with the same chemistry that keeps kids scrolling and scrolling. And then she says, and due to the immature brain, they have a much harder time stopping, even though they want to. Our own product foundation research has shown teens are unhappy with the amount of time they spend on our app. And that's important, ladies and gentlemen, because you're going to hear from so many meta witnesses, I'm guessing, who are going to come in here and testify that it's just fun. We have all these great features, and kids just love to be on there. That's why they spend time. It's not because of anything else. But you will see, this is one internal research study or paper, and you're going to see multiple where they are told time and time again in the research with kids, I can't stop. It's irresistible to me. It's compulsive. I want to stop, but I can't. Two weeks later, I think it's 2.5 months later, we found this in Shaylee Jimenez's files. She was who wrote the research paper. And she was presenting her presentation to the leadership, to Adam Mosseri, the #1 executive at Instagram, and talking to him about what she found. And we found this in her files. She says, oh my gosh, y'all, Instagram is a drug. And then her contemporary says, well, basically pushers. And she says, seriously, it is. We are causing reward deficit disorder because people are binging on it so much they can't feel reward anymore. Like the reward tolerance is so high. And she goes on. And she says, I know Adam doesn't want to hear it. He freaked out when I talked about dopamine in my Teen Fundamentals Leads review. But it's undeniable, it's biological, and it's psychological. She presented the research she did on children's brains to the #1 executive who didn't want to hear it and freaked out. And then her colleague says, and this is really important, he says, I think all of us employees work tirelessly to make our products a positive experience for people. But the top-down directives drive it all towards making sure people keep coming back for more. And this is very important. The top-down directives. You're going to hear that a lot. From Mark Zuckerberg and what he calls his small N team, his management team, the directives from them are all to keep people coming back for more time spent. More time equals more money. And you're going to see that and hear that from witnesses, multiple, and you'll see that in documents. And what's important here is Ms. Jimenez's colleague is saying, we're trying to make the place safe. We're trying to make it a good place. And what you're going to hear is there were brave people who were sounding the alarm and telling people, we got to make it safe for kids. We got to warn the public about kids. But the top-down directive from Mark Zuckerberg always prevented that. And we know it came from Mark Zuckerberg because we looked in the files. And this is an email to top executives talking about what the goals are going to be for the company. And this is in November of 2016. Mark, that's Mark Zuckerberg, has decided that the top priority for the company in half one 2017, is teens. The top priority is teens. Our overall company goal is total teen time spent. The overall company goal for the whole company, Facebook, Instagram, everything, is get the teens, make them spend as much time as possible. The priority is teen time spent. So I'm wrapping up the second stop on our road. And I've showed you 4 documents, I think, maybe 3 documents, to show you that the design of Instagram is addictive, with dark patterns, and that is what keeps kids scrolling and scrolling. And what we find in the evidence, and what you'll hear in this case, is that even though the internal researchers were sounding the alarm and about the dangers to children, the executives don't want to hear it. They freak out. And the directive from the top, very top, is always more time spent. This is 3 documents. You're going to see a bunch more. And every quote on this screen was in the documents I just showed you. But you'll see much more. That brings us to the harms to children from Instagram's addictive-like design. This is where we talk about harms that have been occurring literally for a decade, that are piling up, harms in Tennessee as well. Meta designing Instagram to be addictive is part of the story, but this is a very important part of the story, the other part where children have been suffering serious harms for years. These are some of the harms, many of them, that children suffer from their use of Instagram. Addiction, problematic use, depression, anxiety, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, sleep disorders, suicide and self-harm, and then sexual exploitation and grooming, which I'll talk about later. I won't here. But you're going to see all kinds of evidence that children are suffering from these types of harms. And we'll have expert witnesses who will say that any child who uses Instagram is at risk for these harms because they're a child. But let me be clear. The state is not contending that every child who picks up a phone is seriously and uses Instagram is seriously harmed from Instagram. There are many children who use Instagram and are not seriously harmed. But I think it'll be clear to you from the evidence in this case that millions and millions of children have been harmed by their use of Instagram. And it's either the cause of that or it contributes to cause that. Now, we're going to bring you experts who are going to talk about the research they've done related to the harms that Instagram and other social media can cause them. We'll bring you Dr. Melissa Hunt. She's a clinical psychologist at the University of Penn. And she has studied for a decade how social media affects young people's mental health. She actually published one of the first studies, I think it was the first study in the world, that showed that if you cut back on social media, that you're happier, that you're less depressed. She published that. And she'll talk about the research in general that is out there. And she'll also talk about the internal meta research that had never seen the light of day that she evaluated. And she'll say, they found the harms. They knew about the harms. Instagram was harming their kids, and they were finding it in the research. And she'll explain that to you. We're also going to bring Dr. Parker Houston, who is a licensed child psychologist. He's treated children for a decade. He is in the trenches treating kids, daily who have mental health harms. And he'll tell you that nowadays It's very rare when he treats kids with mental health that social media is not the cause of that, or at least a very big part of that problem for children. And then I mentioned that we'll look at some of Instagram's internal research. The research that revealed the harms back in real time. And I want to show you just a few of those. Here's Meta's internal research from August and September of 2009. So we're about 6 years earlier. And researchers were doing research specifically with teens to say, how is Instagram affecting your mental health? They wanted to know. And these are the results that they put together in a report that were never provided to the public. And here are two of their top line findings. Teens are hooked, despite how it makes them feel. Instagram is addictive, and time spent on platform is having a negative impact on mental health. Meta's research, their own research. Instagram is the worst platform for mental health. That's what they found when talking to teens. Instagram is called out for being the most problematic social media platform for mental health, but it's also the most popular. And you'll hear that. Instagram was blowing everybody away as far as popularity. That's not all they found. Instagram is an inevitable and unavoidable component of teens' lives. Teens can't switch off from Instagram even if they want to. Teens talk of Instagram in terms of an addict's narrative, spending too much time indulging in a compulsive behavior that they know is negative but feel powerless to resist. Meta's own internal research that never has seen the light of day. And this is additional research from product management on the well-being team who was looking at whether or not Instagram was harming children back in 2018, I believe. And in 2018, their researchers had developed a model of how addictive-like or addiction, social media addiction, could lead to suicide. It starts with social media addiction. And then that can lead to lack of in-person time. That can lead to sleep deprivation. And that can lead to loneliness. And that can lead to depression. And then you've got negative well-being all the way to suicide and self-harm. 2018, 8 years ago, this never saw the light of day. They had already modeled it, and they will come in here and tell you that Instagram can't cause any of this. Additional research they had, social media addiction, teens using social networking, 10 plus hours, just 10 plus hours a week, have greater the risk of unhappiness. And the risk is the greatest for the youngest of the teens. Sleep deprivation, social media device usage increases the risk of inadequate sleep. But sleep deprivation and inadequate sleep increases the risk of depression and suicide. And they say teens who don't sleep enough are more than twice as likely to report higher levels of depression. And teens who don't sleep enough have at least one risk factor for suicide. And then you'll see evidence about this. You can see sort of the spike. It's hard to read. On the right, sort of the hockey stick, it goes up. That is an increase in depression among teens in our country. That is essentially precisely the time, 2012, 13, 14, when Instagram took off in its popularity. This is another internal researcher model that their research teams put together. This one's from 2020. And this one's very important because what their internal researchers found was that people who have existing vulnerabilities, tough things in their lives, like low socioeconomic status, or their adolescence, or they have mental health in their family, or they have pre-existing mental health problems, they found that Instagram is even worse for that group of individuals. And the evidence will be that Instagram will show you this, that Instagram takes those problems and amplifies them. And the evidence will be that those individuals who have pre-existing vulnerabilities, they're the ones that are even more susceptible to addiction from Instagram. Meta knows that the most vulnerable of our children are the most at risk for this addiction and all these mental health harms. And as you see on the left, there's existing vulnerabilities, like things like mental health and low socioeconomic status. Then they use social media, and they use it excessively or at night, and they have bad experiences, and that can cause poor sleep, and that can cause poor self-esteem, and that can cause negative body image, and then that goes to mental health harms. And what happens is it becomes a feedback loop. The researchers called it a negative feedback loop, because those kids then go back to Instagram to try to feel better, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. This never saw the light of day. These are some of the Meta internal research documents that will show you. There are several others that you will see. And then we'll also show you the evidence that Instagram has caused serious harm to the mental health of children in Tennessee. We'll show you that Tennessee, mental health in Tennessee among children, it's basically, social media has basically devastated them. The state of Tennessee closely monitors data about teen mental health. It's the Commission on Children and Youth that does it, and they collect the data from federal and state departments, and they look for patterns that are negative, concerns of mental health, and things like that. And you're going to hear from Richard Kennedy, who's the executive director of that, and he's going to show you some very grim statistics about how in the state of Tennessee mental health in teens has declined extensively. Here's some of the things. 42% of Tennessee high school students reported feeling sad or hopeless. This is 2020 YRBS data from the CDC that was collected. That is done every 2 years. So they did it in 25, and that data is not out yet. So this is 2023. But nearly 4 in 10 kids in high school in Tennessee reported feeling sad or hopeless. And look at among females. 55%, more than half, reported feeling sad or hopeless. Sad or hopeless is a metric that's used nationally, federally. It's an indicator of depression. More than 1 in 4 had engaged in non-suicidal self-harm within the last 12 months. Self-harm is the cutting of people, and you'll see that there's lots of that on Instagram. There'll be evidence of that. And then they also track in Tennessee and nationally mental health related to suicide, ideation and actual attempts, and of course successful suicides. In 2023 in Tennessee, nearly 1 in 5 Tennessee high school students made a plan of how they would attempt suicide. 1 in 5. And it's worse for young girls. 30% reported seriously considering attempting suicide. 1 in 4 made a plan, and nearly 1 in 6 attempted suicide in Tennessee in the 12 months before 2023. 1 in 6. Now, we are not claiming that all of these statistics are from Instagram use, okay? Of course, kids have all kinds of challenges. We know that. But what you will hear from the witnesses from the Tennessee Department of Health, who will testify in this case, the individuals who are on the ground actually helping provide care and treatment to these families and these teens who are in need because their mental health is so bad, they will tell you that social media use and its negative impact on teen mental health is the #1 challenge facing Tennessee families and teens. That's what you'll hear. And that brings us to our fourth and final stop on the road. Don't get excited, though, because this is the longest stop on the road. Now we're changing gears. We were talking about our unfairness claim, our claim that Instagram is designed in an unfair way that takes advantages of kids and causes them harm. Now we're talking about our deception claim, evidence of Meta's false and misleading statements. And we believe we will prove to you in this trial that Meta has deceived the public by not only hiding the dangers they know about related to Instagram, but by downplaying and misleading the public about those dangers. And actually even saying to the public, it's safe for kids. It's safe and good for kids. But just not telling the public that there are dangers and risks. That's what I want to preview for you now. We're on number 2. Meta did not tell the truth, the whole truth about the dangers of Instagram. And we believe that's a violation of the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act. At the end of the case, Chancellor Perkins is going to give you an instruction, and you'll be asked to determine whether or not Meta made false and misleading statements. And we're going to give you evidence through this trial to try to help you answer that question. And we'll give it to you, what Meta tells the public about Instagram's safety, and we'll also give you the evidence related to what Meta knew, what Meta privately knows about Instagram's dangers when they make those statements. And so I put together certain categories that I want to go through. These are all, not all of them, obviously, just a few that we'll go through related to what we believe are false and misleading statements. First is related to Instagram's addictiveness. And we've really covered this already. You saw these slides. I showed you documents. It shows things like dark patterns, addictive-like features being used, that it was designed to exploit the insecurities and the weaknesses and to provide dopamine rushes to keep them on there for as long as possible. I'm not going to go through those documents again. This is that slide that has all the quotes that we believe strongly support that Instagram was designed in a way that was addictive. But Meta tells the public that it's not. This is Antigone Davis. She's Meta's global head of safety. She's testifying before Congress in 2001, and she says, I disagree with calling our product addictive. This is Mark Zuckerberg in 2020. He's asked by a senator, Mr. Zuckerberg, do you believe your product can be addictive? We certainly do not design the product in that way. And this is Adam Mosseri. He's the head executive at Instagram. He is telling senators in the Congress, Senator, respectfully, I don't believe the research suggests that our products are addictive. They're reassuring the public that it's safe. It's not addictive to kids. On the left, what Meta said. On the right, what Meta knew internally. And what the evidence will be is they're still hiding it today. And you'll hear further evidence about the links that executives and leadership inside Meta would go to try to keep the public from knowing. Here's what I mean. The directive from the top in approximately 2021, when there was a leak of information, the directive to the Meta researchers and product managers and teams was, don't say the word addiction. Don't write the word addiction. Don't study addiction. The word addiction is radioactive. You're going to hear evidence of all that. And the reason given was because if it's written down or if we study it and we have data, it could be leaked to the public. They don't want the public to know what they know. Next category. Meta tells the public we don't maximize time spent. We're not trying to keep people on the app for as long as possible. Here's Mr. Zuckerberg in 2020 and 2021. He says, I don't give our Instagram team goals around increasing the amount of time that people spend. And then he's also told Congress the year before that, I don't think companies should be optimizing to encourage people to spend as much time as possible. He's admitting a company shouldn't do that. Shouldn't do that. But we looked in the files, and here's what we found. Mark has decided that the top priority for the company in 2017 is teens. Our goal overall is total teen time spent. Goal, increase U.S. teen time spent. And then we found this. This is in 2021, the next year. And this is Max Eulenstein. You'll see this email. You'll have this. And he's commenting about strategy with Adam Mosseri on this email. And he says, no one wakes up thinking they want to maximize the number of times they open Instagram that day. But that's exactly what our product teams are doing. Our product teams are trying to maximize the time these children open up Instagram every day. And then you'll see this, it's called a workplace chat from Tom Winter, and you probably will see his videotape deposition. He lives out in California. He says at a time when actually Mark Zuckerberg is speaking to the company, and he's giving the company position like, we don't maximize time spent. That's not what we do. And he writes, the company position is that we're not just tuning the algorithm to keep people scrolling as much and as long as possible, except mechanically we absolutely do. And then he says, the algorithm is absolutely tuned to maximize engagement. You'll see his testimony about this. What Meta tells the public versus what Meta knows. Meta says, new category, safety first. Meta says we put as a priority safety ahead of profits. They tell the public that. And here's one occasion when they did that. This is in 2021, Mr. Zuckerberg. Actually, this is a blog from him that he puts on Facebook. This goes to over 1 billion people. And he says, at the heart of these accusations is this idea that we prioritize profits over safety and well-being. That's just not true. It's very important to me that everything we build is safe and good for kids, reassuring the public that everything they build is safe, and they don't prioritize profits. But ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear, as I mentioned previously, from multiple witnesses in this case who will say what Mr. Zuckerberg said is just not true. Brave people who have risked a lot. This is Dr. Natalie Trotzel. She's a former senior researcher at Instagram, PhD in developmental psychology, trained in young children's healthy emotional development. She will tell you in her testimony that she went there to try to make a difference. She loved the idea of connecting people, but she got there and she found out the truth. And she'll tell you the company wasn't prioritizing positive child development. It was prioritizing revenue. This is Dr. Allison Lee, another senior researcher who was at Meta. Incredible credentials, cognitive scientist specializing in youth development, led research at Meta on youth safety. She actually read it. She went there, she says. Same reason. I thought this would be a great place to try to make a difference, to try to make children safe and connect and be happy. She got there and she found out it couldn't happen. Their attention and priorities were elsewhere, mainly in growing their product, growing their platform, and increasing engagement. And we're going to bring you, I hope, if we have enough time, these three witnesses. Arturo Behar, former Meta Director of Engineering, Brian Boland, former Meta VP of Partnerships, and Dr. Annika Buffone, who was the Meta Researcher Manager. And you're going to hear from each of these witnesses about corporate culture that comes from the very top, from Mark Zuckerberg. It's growth and revenue at all costs, even at the expense of safety. And you'll hear that 2 of the 3 of these went all the way to Mark Zuckerberg. They literally went all the way to Mark Zuckerberg and pleaded with him, you have to change the culture. Arturo Behar said, children are being harmed and you don't even understand it, Mr. Zuckerberg. Both of them were ignored. And Margaret Stewart, you'll hear her deposition. She's the former Meta VP of Product Design and Responsible Innovation. She actually went all the way to Mark Zuckerberg as well, all the way to the top. And she said to him, she said, hey, we have a feature on Instagram that is harming teenage girls. Serious harm. And I have 2 teenage girls, and I'm experiencing it. We need to change this. We need to make a change to protect teenage girls. Ignored. Meta says safety first. What Meta knows internally, and what you'll hear about extensively, is that it's revenue, growth, profits over safety. Another category. Meta claims to be transparent. And this is Mr. Zuckerberg in a blog to 1 billion people saying, if we wanted to hide our results, why would we have established an industry-leading standard for transparency and reporting on what we're doing? Now, I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you're also going to hear multiple witnesses who are researchers at the company, some who are still there, that say, yeah, we're not allowed to, if we show harms to children or in our research and things, we're not allowed to share that with the public. It doesn't go outside the walls because it's too much risk for the company. You're going to hear about this bad experiences encounters framework survey. Based on what my team has seen, we think this is the largest survey study that Instagram had done. 237,000 users they surveyed about bad experiences, harmful experiences. And what they wanted to do, Arturo Bejar will testify to this, is they wanted to ask them, if you're having these bad experiences, how bad is it emotionally on you? What emotional impact is it having? And they wanted that because they wanted to take that data to Mark Zuckerberg and they wanted to say, you can't deny this. You can't deny this. So we looked in the files, and we looked in the files of the data scientist who was responsible for cleaning the data and making sure to analyze the data and report out the data, Kyle Robert Andrews. And he says, Beef asked a question about emotional impact, but I was told I need to delete that data. We can't analyze it. And his contemporary says, perhaps I can give it a try? No. For policy legal reasons, I was told we need to delete the data and not analyze it. And he deleted it. And it was never analyzed. And the executives didn't see it. Now, Mr. Mosseri is going to testify, we didn't delete it all the way from the servers, but the point is, it was never looked at, it was never analyzed. Turns out, Mr. Andrews was not the only one told to delete the data. This is Dr. Jason Sadazan, a former Meta senior researcher. He was working on research to see whether or not children are being harmed. And he found, actually in the VR world, virtual reality world, that children were being harmed by sexual predators. He was finding data. He wanted to continue with the research. Legal interfered with his research and came to him and said, delete it. And this time erase it. You're going to hear from several researchers that they were not transparent. Meta says they're transparent. Internally, they're deleting data. Another category. Meta claims no kids under 13 allowed. They have a policy like we're not going to allow preteens, 9-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds. And they're telling the public that they enforce that. Here's Mark Zuckerberg. In March of 21, he says, if we detect that someone might be under the age of 13, even if they lied, we kick them off. And then Mr. Mosseri says, if a child is under the age of 13, they are not permitted on Instagram. That's what they tell the public, reassuring the public that they enforce their policies, their safety policies. So we looked at Antigone Davis's, the global head of safety, files, and a lot of other files, and here's what we found in November of 2018. I think we risk generating more negative press than positive, especially when we do very little to keep U13s, under 13s, off our platform. off our platform. And you're going to hear evidence and see documents and actually research that has been done that has shown over the years there's been millions and millions and millions of under 13s on Instagram, and there still are today. They don't enforce the policy. And this was in 2020, just a year before Ms. Davis said that to Congress. This is the former VP of Global Affairs, and he says, the fact we say we don't allow under 13s on our platform, they go out, yet have no way of enforcing it is just indefensible. Just indefensible. They don't enforce it. And they say they do, but it's indefensible. And then he recognizes, very important, the next statement, we know there are harms associated with preteen use of social media. They know that these young kids are at greater risk for harms on Instagram, but they're not enforcing it. Meta will come into this courtroom and they will deny this. What they say publicly, what Meta knew internally. And we looked, how big was this problem over the years, going back how far? And we found this document in 2018 saying we can estimate that there were 4 million people under 13 in 2015 on Instagram. This represents around 30% of all 10 to 12-year-olds in the U.S. And it's continued year after year after year. We'll show you evidence of that. The next category has to do with sexual exploitation of children. I mentioned this in jury selections. It's a little tough to discuss, but it's super important. And I want to make it clear up front, and I'll probably make it again, that we are not claiming in this lawsuit that Meta is responsible to keep all bad actors and sexual predators off of Instagram. That's not our case. But they have the duty, they have to be honest about the risk that's there. And they're not. We'll show you that. This is their website. We have zero tolerance when it comes to sharing sexual content involving minors. Ms. Davis, in 2021, on Instagram, we prevent adults who have exhibited potentially suspicious behavior from interacting with young people's accounts. We prevent it. That's in 2021. And then she says we use sophisticated technology to detect it and to prevent grooming or these inappropriate interactions between a minor and adult. But we looked in their files and we looked to see this sophisticated technology, does it work, that she's talking about? And what they call internally that sophisticated technology is classifiers. That's what's the algorithms or the technology they're using to find these sexual predators to try to keep them away from kids so that kids can't interact and message with them and be recommended by their own algorithm to them, things like that. And this is the #1 engineer on the well-being team, Yoav Shapira. And he says those classifiers are somewhere between non-existent and shitty. People seem to refuse to believe it, sadly, across the family of apps. Everybody wants these classifiers to be better, but they suck and they're not improving fast. 2020, same year. And what we found internally and the evidence you're going to see, this technology, these classifiers, they don't work. And this is a document where they're discussing an escalation of what is called inappropriate interactions, inappropriate sexual interactions between adults and children. That's what they're talking about here. They tell people that they use sophisticated technology. We look in the file, and that's what we found. And then I wanted to show you a document about the extent of the harms to the children from this that are happening. This is in 2020. And this is leadership of the well-being team and Instagram leadership. And they're talking with data scientists and they're trying to figure out how often are these inappropriate interactions with children, sexual interactions, IIC, sexual interactions with children happening on Instagram. Here's what they find. We'll show you this document. You'll see it. The metric is approximately 500,000 child victims every day in English markets alone. 500,000 a day in 2020. And they went over and Mickey Rothschild, who's in charge of the well-being team, says these numbers are quite wrong. We looked to see how their sex trafficking classifier was working. They do audits periodically, and this is an audit from July 2020. They're looking, sort of giving themselves a report card and seeing how it works. You know, are we keeping kids away? And this is what we found. This area is severely under-resourced. They only have one engineer dedicated to it. And I wanted to show you this 17x, 17 times. The classifier gives potential sexual predators 17 strikes. Not one strike, not two strikes. It takes 17 strikes before they indicate that there's a problem. Now, Mr. Messeri, I believe, will testify, well, this isn't talking about kids. The name of the document is Child Safety Say of Play. Zero tolerance, they say, detect and prevent what Meta knew, 17 strikes. 17 strikes is not zero tolerance. And 500,000 child victims a day is not prevention. And then we found this audit. This is in 2023. This is much later. And they're doing another audit to see how are we doing. Are we keeping kids away from what they call high-risk adults? High-risk adults are adults they know are really high risk for being sexual predators because they've caught them before. People have been reporting them. And here's what we found. In one day, the auditor found 231,000 threads initiated between teens and high-risk adults. And then we found, in one day, the auditor found in 2023 approximately 3.4 million recommendations of teens to potential sexual predators. Potential sexual predators is another category that they know of. These are people who are at risk or they've shown that they may be sexual predators. And this is very important because this is accounts you may follow. Some of you may know what that is. This is their own recommendation algorithm connecting teens with potential sexual predators. Meta says publicly, we prevent adults. We prevent that from doing that, what they knew internally. Now, I said it before, so I don't really need to, but again, this is not about policing predators in this case. This is not about removing bad content. In fact, you're going to get instruction from Chancellor Perkins that says that Meta is not responsible for removing bad content, sexual messages, and things like that. This case is about they have to be honest with the public about it so parents have the information and they can decide what they want to do with it and protect their children. They do have a duty to be truthful and honest with the public about it. I want to talk briefly about Meta's Transparency Center. I'm getting close, I promise. Meta has this website, it's called the Transparency Center. They actually call it that. And they say, here's where we give a lot of data about our safety and things like that. And they put on there something called prevalence data. They have some equation that I'm sure they'll tell you about. 10,000 views, they look to see how many nudity got through or something like that. The numbers are incredibly small. Usually they're way less than 1%. They put that out there for the public and they say, look, there's no nudity getting through here or anything like that. But what the next slide will show you is a comparison. For example, with suicide and self-injury content, Meta tells the public on the website, views of violated content that contains suicide and self-injury very infrequent. And we remove that before people even see it most of the time. But internally, they have these surveys and studies, and they're asking teenagers in real time, you know, what's your experience? Are you seeing suicide and self-injury content? And what they find, 17% of teens on the platform had seen that kind of promoting suicide and self-injury content in the last 7 days. What they tell the public and what they knew. Here's another one, unwanted nudity. Meta says on the website, 0.02 to 0.03% of views are adult nudity in sexual activity. But they do these huge surveys. This is the big one, 230,000. 19% of children aged 13 to 15 had witnessed unwanted nudity in the last week. And several of these, you'll see from the study, had seen unwanted nudity up to 10 times during that week. So they tell the public this equation that they do that has these tiny numbers, but they don't tell the public what they have. And parents, you'll hear from the evidence, want to know what are kids experiencing. That's what parents would like to know, but they won't tell the public that. I've talked now for 30 minutes about the deception claim, what Meta tells the public and what Meta privately knows. And there's going to obviously be lots more public statements that we're going to get into and what they knew. But we believe the evidence will show you that over the course of many years, Meta has engaged in a deliberate strategy of hiding and downplaying and misleading the public of the dangers to children of Instagram. My last topic I want to talk about. You're going to hear a lot in this trial about Meta's safety tools. You're going to hear about teen accounts. You're going to hear about parental controls. You're going to hear about some other tools, restrict and block. And Meta witnesses will tell you, we have 70 safety tools. And we've been doing it for years. And so before coming before you, we had to investigate whether or not those safety tools work and are protecting children, because we don't want to claim that children are being harmed if they've got safety tools that protect them. So we talked to experts who tested them. We looked at their internal documents, and here's what we found. These safety tools have big problems. And I'm not going to go into the detail too much here, but these are the three big categories of problems. One is that they were non-existent for years. In other words, from 2012 until 2021, when they have a tool called Take a Break, which no one used, there wasn't any safety tools that would help with addiction or supervision tools, the things we're talking about. They had some bully tools like restrict and block, but those were turned off and nobody used them. So they didn't have anything for the lives and the harms for many, many children we're talking about. In 2016 or 18 or 20, a parent couldn't use a safety tool to help with the kids' addictive problems or compulsive use or excessive use because they didn't exist. And then teen accounts that you're going to hear so much about, that didn't exist until 2024. That came into play after we filed this lawsuit. But you're going to hear from the experts who test teen accounts that it just doesn't work. And the reason why these don't work, even when they were putting them in, and I think I'm right, and maybe I don't want to overstate it, but I think that until 22 or 23, the safety tools that we're talking about that matter for the harms we're talking about, every one of them was turned off by default. Meta knows why to turn them off by default. Because if you bury a safety tool in settings and you turn it off, and a parent or a child has to go into settings and turn it on, guess what? No one's going to use it. No one's going to use it, especially children. Children don't really love to go turn on safety tools. And so we looked at their files, and here's some of the data they have on how much they're being used. Family center supervision, that's the parental controls. 0.38%, less than 0.5%. Are using them. They bury them in places, they make them hard to use, they know nobody's going to use them, because if they use things like that, it might decrease the time spent, which decreases the dollars. Take a Break is one you'll hear about. Less than 0.5%. Take a Break was designed, that was one that was maybe designed to tell a kid, hey, you need to take a break. They buried it, they turned it, and it didn't work. It would come up and say, take a break, and then one of the options was, no, I'm good. And children would click, no, I'm good. And then lastly, they're Band-Aids at best, and we're going to prove that through experts and the documents. Independent testing that's been done on these tools, including teen accounts and the parental controls, they show they just don't do the job. They don't say what they don't do what they say they do. And they're easily circumvented by kids, right? So if a kid just wants to go get another account and say he or she is 18, they don't have a good way to detect that, and so they can just circumvent. So they don't help. And most importantly is the last bullet point, not effective at reducing addiction or problematic use. The things we're talking about, the addictive-like features with dark patterns, infinite scroll, the algorithm tuned to maximize the time spent, notifications, and the other things we talked about. Those are causing the addiction and the compulsive use and things, and those are leading to a lot of the depression and anxiety and eating disorders and things like that. They won't turn those off for children, but you'll hear they could turn those off for children. So if you put Band-Aids on top of it, like teen accounts, but you still have the fire hose of intermittent rewards, and you still have all these safety tools that are driving the kids to keep on it and can't resist it, things like that, it's just not going to work. And you'll see that from the evidence in the case. I'm done. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We talked about in jury selection that the state has the burden in this case. We do. It's a preponderance of evidence, and we think we're going to beat that burden by a long shot. But hold us to it. Hold us to our burden. And I want you to hold me to what I've said. I want you to hold me to what I've said. Make us prove it. We'll prove it. And now Meta's going to stand up. Same thing. I want you to hold them to what they say. I want to say thank you so much for your attention and for your time in advance, for your time and sacrifice you're making for the next several weeks. We get that. We're going to try to be efficient and respect your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's take a break, about 10 minutes.
All right.
Do you want to take a lunch break before you do your opening, or do you?
That was exactly what I was going to ask, Your Honor. Kevin, on behalf of Meta Platforms. I have about an hour that I could do where there's a breaking point, so it's up to Your Honor's pleasure. I'm happy to start, do an hour, take a lunch, and then do an hour. I'm happy to take a lunch break now, whatever is most convenient.
Well, I defer to your judgment. If you ask me for the lunch break, then I will give it. But other than that, it's up to you.
Okay, I think let's do an hour and we'll go from there.
All right. Anything else?
Anna Paul, on behalf of Meta Platforms. I have the hard copy of the revised jury instruction number 7, which you had ordered and the parties have agreed to. I can hand it
Thank
over.
you. And before I release them for lunch, after you do your hour, I'm going to read them state instruction number 3, okay? Anything else we need to take up before we bring the jury?
Nothing from that, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. And now you will hear the opening statement from Meta.
Good morning, members of the jury, and thank you very much for your service in this important trial. My name is Bob Cooper. As you heard during the jury selection process, I had the honor of serving as Tennessee's Attorney General, Tennessee, my home state, about a little more than 10 years ago. I now practice law with the firm of Bass, Berry & Sims here in Nashville, and my firm, along with the Kellogg Hansen firm, represent Meta and Instagram and are proud to present their defense in this case. You're going to meet about 5 members of our team over the next few weeks, cross-examining the state's witnesses. One of those lawyers, Kevin Huff, whom you've already met during jury selection, is now going to open Meta's defense, and he looks forward to talking with you about Meta's defense and what facts will come out during this trial. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Your Honor, may I proceed?
You may.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. We met last week. My name is Kevin Huff, and I represent Meta Platforms and Instagram in this case. With me here today are several members of the legal team, and as Mr. Cooper mentioned, you're going to be meeting some of them over the course of the trial. Also here today is Ms. Antigone Davis, who's sitting at counsel table there. She is Meta's global head of safety, and she works every day to help make Instagram safer for everyone, including teenagers in Tennessee. And I'm really looking forward to you all getting to hear her testimony later in this trial. I want to start off by saying thank you again, like I did before. Jury service is the cornerstone of our system, and it makes our country special because it means that even powerful government officials, like the Attorney General Skrmetti, they don't get to decide what is right and true. You, citizens of Tennessee, get to decide that. My colleagues and I look forward to presenting Meta's side of the story in this case. And we are confident that after you hear all the evidence from both sides, you will find that Meta designed Instagram to be fun and engaging, not to addict anyone. Meta told the truth about Instagram. It didn't mislead anyone. So I want to give you a roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. And I also want to say that I'm going to go for about an hour because I don't want to impinge on your lunch time, and then I will finish after the lunch. But here's our roadmap that you can see up on the screen. And right now we're going to talk about an introduction to the evidence. I want to just start with what Instagram is because I remember from jury selection not everyone uses Instagram. It's a social media app. It's kind of like Facebook, and it allows people to connect with their friends and family and learn about the world. Instagram is free, and a lot of people truly enjoy using it. In fact, Instagram is so popular that 3 billion people around the world use Instagram every day, and about 5 million people right here in Tennessee use Instagram. People use Instagram for the vast majority of its use for positive and healthy things, seeing what friends and family are up to, pursuing particular hobbies, watch entertaining videos, or maybe just waste a little time at the end of a long work or school day. The fact that people like to spend time on Instagram is good because it means that Instagram is providing a service that people enjoy. Now, you heard the lawyer for Attorney General Skrmetti say that there are some bad people who do bad things on Instagram, including things like child sexual exploitation. And you know what? He is right about that. This is one of the few times he and I are going to agree in this trial. But it's really important for you to understand that the state can't win this case by showing that there are bad people who do bad things on Instagram. In fact, the Honorable Court is going to tell you that under the law,
Meta cannot be liable for allowing or failing to remove content posted by third parties on Instagram. And that's really important in this case and for your decision. So what are the state's claims? You heard that today. The state claims that Meta deceived the public about risks on Instagram. That's the Deceptive Businesses Practices Act claim. The state also claims that Meta acted unfairly in designing Instagram in a way that the state says is addictive and harmful for children. That's the unfair business practices claim. The evidence in this case is going to show the exact opposite, that Meta told the truth and actually works hard to protect teens. Meta has repeatedly disclosed the risks of Instagram and warned parents and teens that harmful content gets through Meta's safeguards. Meta disclosed this, and we're going to walk through some of those disclosures today. The evidence is also going to show that Meta designs Instagram to be fun and entertaining, not to addict teens or harm teens. In fact, Meta has built industry-leading tools to protect teens from bad content and specifically to help them control the amount of time they spend on Instagram. Now, I want to talk today about 3 business philosophies that Meta has for dealing with these difficult issues. And we're going to talk about them a good bit during my opening statement. Meta's first philosophy is to disclose the risks of Instagram. And what I mean by disclosure is Meta issues public statements on its website, on the app itself, to the press, in congressional statements, and a lot of other public places about the risks of social media. And one example of that is the Transparency Center that Counsel for the State talked about. And we're going to talk a lot about that Transparency Center. Meta tells the world about the risks of social media so that teens and parents can decide for themselves whether to use Instagram. Meta warns parents and teens when they sign up for Instagram about the risks. Meta warns parents and teens about particular types of bad content while they are using the app, and we will show you some of that. Meta tells the public about particular risks that teens might encounter on Instagram. And Meta also tells the public about the risk that some people might spend too much time on Instagram. We'll talk about that. Meta also discloses that its safeguards to protect people on Instagram aren't perfect. And we'll explain why it is so difficult for a tech company to be perfect given the volume of material that Instagram deals with on a daily basis. Meta even publicly discloses how much bad content, like the type of content the state talks about, child exploitation, for example. Meta discloses how much of that it finds on Instagram. Meta has disclosed all of these risks for years. We will show you disclosures going all the way back to 2012, the year that Meta bought Instagram, and continuing all the way up to today. That's the first philosophy. The second philosophy is what we call find it, fix it. And what I mean by that is that evidence will show that Meta actually goes out of its way to find problems on Instagram. In fact, Meta has entire teams of people, thousands of people, that are dedicated to looking around on Instagram to try to find problems. And it even has teams of PhD researchers that Counsel for the State talked about. The reason we have those researchers is to try to figure out ways to make Instagram safer and better for teens. And we're going to talk about some of those documents that the state showed you. Now, why does Meta do that? Meta does it because it wants to find problems on Instagram so that it can fix those problems. That is why those documents that the state's lawyer showed you and held up, that's why those documents exist, because Meta is proactively going out and trying to find problems so it can fix them. And we're going to talk about that. Now, Meta could just bury its head in the sand and not look for problems. And I would say a lot of other big social media companies do exactly that. Your Honor, may I? That's okay. Meta could just bury its head in the sand, and a lot of big social media companies do that. But instead of doing that, what you are going to hear about is that Meta does what you would expect a responsible company to do. It looks for problems, finds them so it can fix them. Meta's third philosophy is that Meta empowers teens, parents, and schools, teachers, with tools to help protect teens. You will learn about dozens of safeguards that Meta has built, automated ones and human ones. You will learn about cutting-edge technology that Meta has developed to look for problems on Instagram. And you will learn about tools that Meta has provided to parents and teachers to empower them and help them protect kids. One of the most important of those tools is called teen accounts, which the state's lawyer talked about. Teen accounts provide automatic protection for teens, even if a parent doesn't have time to turn them on. And we're going to talk a lot about teen accounts in this trial. The evidence will show that Meta wants to work in partnership with parents and with teachers in order to achieve the shared goal of keeping kids safe on Instagram. And I think Meta's business philosophies, these three philosophies I've just talked about, are important because, as I just told you, the state's claim is that Meta deceived the public and designed Instagram in a way that harms teens. But Meta's business philosophies show the opposite of that. They show that Meta disclosed the truth, it didn't deceive anyone. And they show that Meta designs Instagram with tools to protect teens and empower parents and teachers to help protect teens. Now, during this trial, the state is going to get to put on its evidence first for a few weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And as it does, there's a couple of points that I want you to keep in mind as the evidence is coming in. The first is I want you to think about all the places that we're going to talk about this afternoon where Meta discloses the risks of Instagram, because I don't expect the state to focus on those disclosures. Second, when the state shows you documents like the ones the state's lawyer held up, finding problems, I want you to think about whether you're seeing the documents showing Meta fixing those problems that were identified, because the fixing part hurts the state's case. Third, as we go through the trial, I really want you to focus on the dates. The dates are going to be really important in this case. And the reason for that is because the documents that the state focuses on are all from a long time ago. Some as old as 10 years ago. And I want to give you one example that we just heard about today. We saw counsel for the state talking about how Meta's goal was time spent. Remember that? And that was dated in 2017. Then the state's lawyer showed you a statement from Mark Zuckerberg 4 years later in 2021 saying that time spent is not our goal. Well, guess what? The goal changed in between. And so they are mixing and matching dates. And I really want you to pay attention to the dates to make sure that the evidence that they are showing of what Meta knew versus what Meta said is fair and contemporaneous. So that's another thing I want you to look out for. Also on the dates, Meta, as I mentioned, has been disclosing the risks of social media since 2012. And we're going to focus on some of those disclosures today. Remember that social media is a pretty new technology. In 2012, it was very new. And it's even new today. It is constantly changing, constantly developing. And that's why Meta has to go to all these efforts to find and fix problems, because it's a new industry that everyone is still figuring out. So going back to this question of find it and fix it, I want to give a couple of examples from the documents that you saw from the state's lawyer today. The first one relates to the state's claim of deceptive business practices. You heard the state claim that Meta deceives the public about the risks on Instagram. The state points to internal documents where Meta's people are identifying problems and then says that Meta didn't disclose that problem. So the first one, you saw this from the state earlier today. This is the one that identifies 500,000 victims a day of inappropriate interactions with children. Okay, these are communications between adults and children that are potentially a problem. And what this document said was that Meta was out looking for problems and identified this problem. And by the way, this is not saying that there were that many interactions. These are possible interactions based on Meta's systems. Now, the state claims that this email proves that Meta deceived the public about the risk of inappropriate interactions with children on Instagram. But the evidence will show that is wrong. In fact, if we go to the next slide, Meta has disclosed this potential risk for more than a decade. What you're looking at on the screen, and can anyone not see the screen? I'm sorry that it's so far away. Anybody having trouble seeing it? Great. This is a disclosure from Meta's Parents Guide in 2012. Periodically, Meta will draft parents' guides to give parents help on how they can deal with social media for their kids. And this one's from 2012, and it's been on Meta's website since 2012, available to the public. And it discloses right there in the parents' guide that one of the risks of social media is the potential for inappropriate contact with adults. The reason this disclosure is important is because you heard the state's lawyer tell you this is a deception case. And if Meta has disclosed the truth, then it hasn't deceived anyone. Here's another disclosure. This one is from 2023. This is on Meta's public website, and it specifically warns that online predators are determined criminals who target young people across many apps on the internet. We are going to look at many, many other disclosures on this topic. I'm just giving you two examples to show that Meta has disclosed this risk for more than a decade. So let's look at the specific document that the state showed you. This is the one with the 500,000. And again, I want you to focus on the dates. They didn't blow up the date, but the date is from 2020. That's more than 6 years ago. What they also didn't tell you is what happened after this, and that is important. They showed you the find it part, but not the fix it part. After Meta found this problem, the evidence is going to show that Meta quickly fixed it. Back in 2020, Meta launched a special task force to deal with this issue, and that task force quickly and dramatically decreased the problem. And you can see that in the chart on the right, which is from December 2020, so within a few months. Meta found the problem, put engineers on it, and fixed the problem. Find it, fix it. And Meta didn't stop there. A few months after that, Meta built additional safeguards to address this same problem. In March of 2021, Meta began a system that automatically restricts messages between teens and stranger adults. Now, this restriction is really important because if a stranger adult can't message with a teen, it's much harder for there to be inappropriate interactions between adults and teens. So that was put in place in part to help fix this same problem. That's find it and fix it. So I have a little chart that shows basically that context in this case matters a lot, and I would ask you to please pay attention to that, and the timeline matters a lot. When you look at the whole story, Meta disclosed this risk of inappropriate interactions with children going all the way back to 2012. That's the blue line at the bottom. Meta also built many tools over the years to try to protect kids, and I've only talked about a couple. You will learn about a lot more during the trial. Those are all the purple dots. Those represent real tools for child safety that Meta has built over the years. And for this specific problem about the 500,000, we have the red and the green, find it and fix it. This is not just an isolated example. there are more examples of this, and I want to talk about another one. You remember counsel for the state talking about this team fundamentals document in his opening statement. That's the document that Shaylee Jimenez drafted that had the picture of the brain. This is a document that the state used to argue that Meta designed Instagram in a way to be addictive to teens. And the state says that this document shows that Meta was trying to make Instagram addictive. So let's talk about that. First, let's start with the date. This is another document that's 6 years old. It's from May of 2020. And in fact, what the evidence is going to show, that this is another example of find it, fix it. What's important is what happened after this. So let's go to that. So in May of 2020, Meta's people were looking at problems to find. They have an army of researchers that are looking for problems to find. The reason that they are doing this is in order to help well-being on Instagram for teens. And in fact, in this presentation, it's called the User Experience Research Team, discussed this problem that some teens find that they use Instagram too much. Now, I want you to focus on the email that went along with this presentation. That's the one on the right. That's the same date. It was the same time as the presentation. This is an email from Shaylee Jimenez, who wrote the presentation. And what did she say? She said, there is a balance we need to strike between driving engagement and being mindful of teens' well-being. That's why she's creating this presentation. She said, we do not want to drive usage that is problematic for teens. So the purpose of this presentation was not some evil plot to try to figure out how to addict teens. It was the opposite. It was to try to figure out ways to ensure that teens are not addicted. That is find it, fix it. Now, after this presentation, Meta built additional safety tools to help prevent overuse of Instagram. And I'm going to give you one example, and we are going to talk about probably a half a dozen of these during my opening and more through the trial. About a year after this presentation, and it takes a while to build these tools, Meta introduced a new tool called Take a Break. And what Take a Break did was it would pop up on your screen if you've been on Instagram for a while and remind you, hey, maybe you ought to take a break from Instagram. In the industry, they call that a nudge. It's like, hey, maybe you should take a break from Instagram. And Meta built this tool and deployed it, even though Meta knew that that would reduce the amount of time teens would spend on Instagram because they'd get a nudge and they would turn off Instagram. So when the state talks about profits over people, that is a perfect example of a tool that Meta built in order to, even though it knew it would reduce the amount of time people spent on Instagram. This is another example of find it, fix it. Meta's looking for problems and it's trying to figure out a way to fix it. Now, not only did Meta build tools to empower users to limit their use of Instagram, Meta also disclosed to the world the risks that people might overuse Instagram. This is back in 2012 from the Parents Guide again. And it said, you can see it in the middle, specific social networking risks include spending too much time online, losing a sense of balance in their activities. And of course it says too much is subjective, which is why parents need to be engaged. This one is from 2018. As I said, Meta periodically updates the Parents Guide. This is a Parents Guide from 2018. And it tells the public, many parents worry about their teen's screen time. How much is too much? And it gives advice to parents on how to identify a problem and manage overuse of Instagram. We're going to talk about a lot of other disclosures like this. But remember, this is important because this is a deception case. Meta is telling the world about the very risk that the state claims Meta was hiding. And I have this slide, which is similar to the other one. Throughout this whole time, Meta was disclosing the risk that some people might use Instagram too much. During this same time, Meta was building many, many tools to try to reduce the amount of time people spent, including tools all the way back in 2018, not starting in 2021, but 2018. Those dots represent real tools to reduce use on Instagram that we'll talk about during the trial. And of course, the specific instance of Find It and Fix It that we talked about in 2020. These are just two examples, but they illustrate an important point. The state showed you documents where Meta found problems, but there are two sides to every story, as they say. In this trial, as I mentioned, the state gets to go first. When we get our turn, we will show you that Meta disclosed the risks of Instagram, actively looked for problems on Instagram, tried to fix them, and empowered teens and parents. And we respectfully request that you wait until you can hear both sides of the story before you make up your mind. Now, at this point of the introduction, you might be asking yourself, who is responsible for helping protect teens on Instagram? We talked a little bit about this in jury selection. Meta's witnesses will testify that Meta works to empower everyone, all the stakeholders, to help protect teens. Meta helps by disclosing the risks, like we've talked about, and finding and fixing problems. Meta also builds tools to empower parents, because parents have a role to play too. Meta builds tools to help parents help their kids set boundaries and navigate the online world. Meta builds tools also to empower teachers and schools. They have a role to play, and we're going to talk about some of the tools that Meta builds for them. Meta also helps the government put the bad guys in jail by reporting illegal conduct on Instagram, including child exploitation. We're going to talk about that. And I also want to just point out that when we're talking about inappropriate interactions and child endangerment and things like that, the criminals who do that, those are crimes, the criminals who do that are responsible for their own actions as well. When you hear all the evidence, you should consider whether Meta should be solely responsible for society-wide problems like suicide or child exploitation or addiction. We think the evidence will show that Meta is doing its part and empowering others to do their part, because protecting teens online is a shared responsibility. It takes a village. Now I'd like to dig into some of the evidence that you're going to hear at the trial. That takes us to the second part of our presentation, which is to talk a little bit about Instagram, which is why we're here today. Now, Instagram helps people connect with their friends and family and learn about the world. As I mentioned, it's completely free, and billions of people use it every single day. And in fact, there are billions. There's about 1 billion pictures, videos, and comments posted on Instagram every day. 1 billion. There's tens of billions of text messages that go back and forth on Instagram every day. And that's important, and we'll get to why. But I want to start with just an overview of how Instagram works, because I know some of you use it, but not everybody uses it. And so understanding how it works is important for your understanding of the issues in this case. So there are 5 main ways that you can get information on Instagram. Let's start with feed. Feed is basically like Instagram's home base, similar to Facebook. Feed shows pictures and videos from people that you follow, and also from things that the algorithm thinks you might be interested in. Instagram does use an algorithm, which is really just a fancy computer program that tries to figure out what you might be interested in and show that to you. Many companies use algorithms like this. Netflix uses an algorithm to recommend shows to you based on other shows that you've watched. Second area where you might see content is called stories. Stories are videos that a person shares that disappear within 24 hours. People use them to share everyday moments with their friends and family. The other surface is called Reels. Reels are basically short-form videos that really are just used for entertaining. Next one is Explore. Explore is a grid of photos and videos that the algorithm predicts you might be interested in. It allows you to sort of look around and see what's out there. And you can also use Explorer to search Instagram. There's a search bar, and you can search it just like Google. The last area that we're going to be talking a lot about is direct messages, or what my teens call DMs. Those are just basically text messages like you have on your phone. Now, as you know, Instagram is very popular with teenagers. They use it to communicate with their friends, find their community, and explore their interests. For example, some high school athletes use Instagram to promote themselves to get noticed by college recruiters. Some teen musicians use Instagram to get noticed by fans or record labels. Social media is really how this generation connects and has social connection with each other. It's not really the way I grew up, and I'm sure many of you grew up, but it is how teens have connection now. And teen connection with each other and with the world around them is good. It's a good thing, and it's actually good for their mental health. And that's exactly how Meta has designed Instagram, to create community and to create connection, which is good for people's mental health. And I want to focus for a minute on data, because we're going to be talking a lot about data, like numbers, because data is going to be very important in this case. And the data shows that Instagram has benefits for teen mental health. So for example, the National Academy of Sciences, which is a blue ribbon panel of federal experts, has looked into this question, and they found that social media can help teen mental health. 91% of teens said that social media was mostly positive or neutral. Only 9% said that they thought social media was mostly negative. Meta also does internal research, as you've heard, and Meta found similar results. Up on the screen you can see from Meta's research, for 23 of 24 categories, Instagram makes teens feel better about themselves. Now, when it comes to the benefits of Instagram, you don't have to just take my word for it. You can look at what the state of Tennessee has said. On the screen is a document from the Tennessee Department of Mental Health. It says that teens are more likely to say social media makes them feel more included and confident. This is a document from the state. Next, a document from the State Department of Children's Services. It basically looked at social media apps, and it put them in green zone and red zone. Green zone meaning apps that were the least risky. Guess where the state of Tennessee put Instagram? In the green zone. Safer. This is the same government suing Instagram as dangerous. Here's another one. It's a statement from a video on the official YouTube channel for the Tennessee Department of Mental Health. And we're going to be talking to some of those witnesses at this trial. That's the state agency that studies mental health here in Tennessee. This is an educational training on preventing suicide. The state's educational video talks about whether social media is associated with mental health harms, what we've been talking about here today. And look at what it says. It says none of that is really true. Forgive my language, but that's all a bunch of crap. This is the same state that is suing Meta for this same question. All right. We talked about some of the benefits of Instagram. Now I want to talk about some of the risks. Like anything in life, there are pluses and minuses to Instagram. And unfortunately, when you offer a free service to billions of people, there are some people that misuse it. And Meta doesn't want misuse of Instagram. So Meta has policies against misuse of Instagram, against bullying, against suicide content, against child exploitation. And Meta doesn't want this because it is bad for the experience on Instagram. And I want to talk for a minute about what Meta does to try to protect everyone, including teens, on Instagram. Let's start with the fact that Meta has built cutting-edge automated tools that are designed to basically look through Instagram for inappropriate bad stuff and to try to get rid of it before anyone even sees it. And when Meta's technology catches this inappropriate stuff, like child exploitation or suicide material, Meta gets rid of it. But Meta doesn't just use technology. Meta also has thousands, tens of thousands of employees who are dedicated to looking for problems. In fact, it has enough people to fill up Bridgestone Arena and then some, who are trying to keep people safe on Instagram. This includes hiring former law enforcement personnel, FBI agents, CIA agents, and child safety experts who are dedicated to try to keep Instagram safe. It also includes thousands of human beings who are reviewing content to try to find it and get rid of it. If they find content that is illegal, like child exploitation material, then that is reported to the authorities immediately. I want to talk about some of the content that that is going to be at issue in this case. And I want to start with suicide, self-injury, and eating disorder content. Meta's policy prohibits this type of content, and Meta has automated tools that are designed to get rid of it. And the tools are effective because you can see, this is from Meta's disclosures, Meta will go out and look at 10,000 pieces of content on Instagram, and they will have human beings look at it to see if it's, for example, suicide content. And then it will report to the public how much they find when they do that. That's what is on this transparency report. About 0.05% of the material that those folks looked at violated Meta's suicide policy. Meta even goes offline to try to help people in the real world. If Meta learns about a person who might be suicidal, Meta will reach out to first responders in the real world to try to help that person. And in fact, Meta has done that. Those are called wellness checks. Meta has done that over 15,000 times just in the United States. And I want to talk to you about one example that Ms. Davis will talk about because this is an important issue of her. Meta found through its automated systems that a man in Indiana was streaming a video of himself with a gun, talking to his family, including his child, about the potential that he might take his own life. Meta's automated systems flagged this. Meta reached out to local law enforcement, and luckily law enforcement was able to find this man and take him to get help so that he did not end his own life. You're going to hear about that and a lot of other examples where Meta has helped protect people in the real world. Now, suicide is actually one of the hardest issues for Meta to deal with because it is not as black and white as you might think. And we're going to get criticized by the state for how difficult this issue is, but it is a hard issue. I think we would all agree that a graphic video of someone ending their own life violently is bad and should be taken down, and Meta does its level best to do that. But there are other posts that might talk about suicide that might be a harder thing to deal with. So for example, if someone talks about suicidal feelings but they say that they got help from a support group, that's, on the one hand, it's talking about suicide. On the other hand, it's talking about someone getting help. And on the screen, we have a way of kind of thinking about how difficult these issues are and why it's not so easy to keep Instagram perfectly safe, because different people might disagree. And Ms. Davis is going to testify that Meta works with outside mental health experts to try to figure out where exactly on that line it ought to go. And you'll see evidence that that line changed over time because of some of that advice. Meta also works really hard to build tools to protect kids and everybody else from suicide material and things like that. And just some of those tools are on the screen. And we're going to talk about many of those tools during the course of this trial. Another category the state talked about was child exploitation material, which is also a tough topic. This includes sexual abuse and basically sexual abuse material, as well as inappropriate interactions with children. Meta's rules prohibit this as well. This conduct is against the law, and this is criminals doing criminal things, period. When Meta uses its cutting-edge technology to find this type of material, it gets rid of it and it reports it to the authorities. And the way that it does that is through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is called NCMEC. And under the law, Meta reports this kind of material to NCMEC. NCMEC reports it to the police. And Meta has helped put real bad guys in the real world in jail doing this. I'll give you an example from Tennessee. Meta's tech figured out that a 44-year-old man in Memphis was having an inappropriate relationship with a 14-year-old girl and a 13-year-old girl. And based on Meta's tip, that guy was arrested and sentenced to 30 years in prison. You'll hear about that and other examples. In fact, the CEO of NCMEC, which is that National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, told Meta that it, quote, has done more for child safety than any other tech company. And that's going to be important because these problems are society-wide problems. These problems are industry-wide problems, and you're going to hear evidence that Meta is the best at dealing with these problems. In addition to working with NCMEC, Meta hires safety professionals, including investigative teams made up of former police officers, FBI agents, CIA agents, and federal prosecutors. Meta thinks of these as like the special forces of Meta. And these investigative teams, you can see it up on the screen, have done a lot to throw bad guys in jail, to break up pedophile networks, and remove their accounts. Meta also uses the results from these investigative teams to improve the tools, the safety tools, the find it, fix it, that we talked about before. In addition to the investigations, there are the tools, and here are the safety tools that Meta has built over the years. During this trial, you'll be learning about a lot of these tools. Thanks to these efforts, Meta is able to keep the amount of this type of abhorrent content low. You can see here that when Meta goes out and looks at 10,000 pieces of material like this, looking for material like this, it finds less than 0.01%. Now, of course, any instance of child exploitation is one too many. And so Meta is constantly trying to improve its systems. But I really want to explain to you why this is so difficult. The evidence will show that Meta strives to be perfect, but it cannot be perfect at this. Perfection is impossible, and this is really important. Why is perfection impossible? We'll start by thinking about the volume of content on Instagram. 1 billion posts a day. If you just counted to 1 billion starting right now, it would take you till 2057. That's how big that number is. And that's every single day that many posts get posted. The vast majority of those posts are perfectly fine, cat videos and things like that. But there are some posts that are bad. And the problem is, Meta is looking for a small needle in a huge haystack, and it isn't easy. Now I want to point out something really important here, which is Meta is never going to be able to fix this entirely. It's just too big of a society-wide problem. There's just too much material out there. And the bad guys are constantly changing their tactics, which makes it even harder for Meta to fix it. So I want to give you an example of this just so that you can understand what we're up against. When Meta builds a new tool, criminals try to circumvent it. So Meta would search for the word child pornography to try to find that kind of stuff. And these bad people, these criminals, to avoid the safeguards, they started using the word cheese pizza to mean child pornography because it has the same initials, CP. And they did that because it would get around Meta's automated systems. If you think about it, most people who are talking about cheese pizza are talking about cheese pizza. And so this fooled Meta's systems for a while. And when Meta discovered this, it fixed that problem, found it and fixed it. Then the bad guys switched to the Spanish word for caldo de pollo, which is basically chicken soup. And then Meta found that one. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. Do you remember the game whack-a-mole where a mole would pop up and you'd hit it with a mallet? That's what Meta has to deal with. And you're going to hear from Meta's child safety experts who are in this battle every single day. Now, you might ask yourself, why does Meta go to these lengths with hiring former CIA agents and things like that to get rid of this content? Well, the first reason is it's just the right thing to do. Meta actually wants people to have good experiences on Instagram. That's why Instagram was created. But the second reason that Meta does this is because good experiences are good for business. It is true that Meta makes its money by advertising. That is true, and Meta is in the business to make money. But an important thing is that if people have bad experiences on Instagram, then they're not going to come to Instagram, and Instagram is not going to make money. And if if advertisers think that Instagram is not safe, the advertisers are not going to advertise on Instagram. Think about what would happen if Instagram put an ad for Coca-Cola next to some child sexual abuse material. That would be devastating to Instagram's business. So Instagram actually has a big business reason to try to get rid of this kind of filth. Here's a document on the screen that says exactly what I just said. This is a meta document that helping people have a safe experience is best for our business because people don't want to see this harmful content and advertisers don't want it on the app either. Now, in addition to the risk of seeing bad content, another risk of Instagram is that some people use it too much. And when the state's expert comes, that's Dr. Lemke that you saw her picture on the screen, we expect her to take a very extreme view. She is going to say that Instagram is just as addictive as heroin. The evidence will show that that goes way too far. There is a huge difference between addiction to heroin and problematic use of Instagram. You might have seen the devastation that heroin addiction can cause to people. It leads to terrible withdrawal symptoms, and it can lead to death from overdose. People who use Instagram don't have withdrawal symptoms, and they certainly don't die if they stop using it. In fact, you're going to learn that the leading medical authorities do not support the extreme view of the state. The American Psychiatric Association publishes what's called the DSM. This is the Bible on mental health conditions in the United States. And it recognizes something like 300 different mental disorders, and including, by the way, addiction to heroin. It does not, however, recognize social media addiction as a thing. Now, you heard a lot from the state about dopamine, the chemical that is in everyone's brain right now as we're sitting here. And the state's expert, Dr. Lemke, will claim that dopamine makes social media addictive. That's what you heard from the state. But the evidence is going to show that Dr. Lemke is wrong for two reasons. First, you're going to hear from Dr. Randy Auerbach, who's a respected professor of psychiatry at Columbia University in New York. He will testify that dopamine is a normal, natural brain chemical that is released in our brains when we do something that's pleasurable. You have dopamine release when you do something like riding a bike or reading a book or eating ice cream. Now, do sometimes some people do those things too much? Yes. But that doesn't mean that those things are addictive in the same way as heroin. The second reason that Dr. Lemke is wrong with her dopamine analysis is that for social media to cause addiction like this, social media would have to release more dopamine in your brain than is normal from a pleasurable thing. And Dr. Auerbach is going to tell you about a recent scientific study that was conducted that shows the opposite. And you can see it up there. That's from 2026, and he's going to talk about the science. And he knows it better than I do, so I'll let you wait for him to explain it. But 2026, they tested this dopamine theory of Dr. Lemke, and it's wrong. Not only that, I think you're going to see when you hear Dr. Lemke testify that she is far outside the scientific consensus on addiction. She's going to tell you, forget about the DSM. They're wrong. She'll tell you that Instagram is as addictive as heroin, and when I get the chance to cross-examine her, she's going to tell you that almost anything can be addictive. She will say that reading books, celebrity gossip, online travel information, online weather, chess, playing sports, watching sports, and weirdly compliments are addictive. She's written it herself in her own words. You'll have to decide whether an opinion like that deserves any weight. Now, the evidence will also show that the vast majority of teens do not have any problem overusing Instagram. You're going to hear from an expert economist who's calculated how much time teens in Tennessee spend on Instagram. And he's going to show you that the median, the middle, is 8 minutes a day. And that the average is about 35 minutes a day. Now, it's true that some teens use Instagram more than the average by definition. But for many of those teens, more time on Instagram isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be a good thing. They might be using Instagram to learn how to play the guitar like my son did over the pandemic. They might be using Instagram to learn about chemistry. Or they might be using Instagram to communicate with their study group. That might show that they spent 2 hours on Instagram or something like that. But all that means is they're texting with their friends or they're texting with their study group. It really depends on each teen. That's why Meta believes that parents know what is best for their own kids. And that is why Meta gives tools to parents to help control the amount of time their kids spend on Instagram. We're going to talk about those tools a lot. Now, it's also important to know that Meta actually doesn't want teens to spend too much time on Instagram, contrary to what the state claims. And there's a few reasons for that. The first is the same as for the bad content. Meta wants people to enjoy their time on Instagram. Meta doesn't want teens to feel like they're overusing Instagram and feel bad. But there's also a business reason for this as well. Meta has studied this carefully. And people who feel like they are using Instagram too much, they are 4 times more likely to delete their account and stop using it. Meta doesn't want that for business reasons. And so that is why Meta has built all the tools that I'm going to tell you about to try to limit overuse of Instagram. So how does Meta go about doing this? This is an example of the state showing you internal research and saying it's bad when actually it's good. These are some examples of some of that internal research, and it talks about the goals of why Meta is doing the internal research. Our goal is to offer supportive, appropriate tools. That was back in 2018. 2019, a focus on problematic use allows us to help a larger group of people. 2022, we want to reduce behaviors of problematic use and increase a sense of control. That's why Meta is doing that research. Not to try to figure out how to addict teens, but to figure out how to help them. These are Meta's internal documents. And what they show is Meta trying to figure out ways to help. Now think about that for a minute. What other companies do research to figure out how to get people to use their services less? Does Coca-Cola do research to figure out how to make people drink less Diet Coke? No, they don't, but Meta does do that. And over the years, Meta has built many, many tools to help people control how much time they spend on Instagram. And just a sample of those are up on the screen. And they start all the way back in 2018 with Daily Reminder, 2021, Take a Break. And we're going to talk about a lot of these tools over time. Okay. I want to switch gears and talk for a minute about the state's claim that Meta does not prioritize safety because all it cares about is profits. The evidence will show this is simply not true. First, the evidence will show that Meta does more for safety than any other company in the industry. Meta's senior leaders are committed to protecting safety of all users, and they have acted on that commitment. You can see just some of the organizations, and Ms. Davis is just one part of one section of the safety organizations that Meta has built over time. You're going to hear about the human reviewers, the engineering teams, and the content policy teams, all of which are devoted to try to protect teens and others. There are even specific issue teams that you can see up there on the left. There's a child safety team, an SSI team, that's suicide and self-injury, a bullying team. Second, Meta has built many, many, many safety tools over the years. And this is just a graphical representation, but every single one of those boxes is a different safety tool. And you can see at the bottom the different subject areas of those safety tools. We're going to talk a lot about those. Third, Meta has repeatedly chosen to build safety tools even though it knew that doing that would reduce the amount of time teens spend on Instagram. You're going to hear testimony from Syed Otaru, who helped build teen accounts. And he is going to walk you through a bunch of safety tools that Meta built over the years, knowing that it would reduce the amount of time that teens spend on Instagram. Some of them are listed there. Meta built these tools and implemented them, even though it knew that that would reduce time spent. But Meta did it anyway. Fourth point I want to make on this is that the state claims that Meta wants to addict teens because Meta is going to make so much money from teens by advertising. The evidence, the data, remember the data is important in this case, the data is going to show that's not true. Meta makes less than 2% of its money off teens. Now why is that? Think about it. Teens don't have money to spend. Teens don't have credit cards. And so advertisers don't pay as much money for teens as they do for adults. So what Meta really wants is for teens to have good, fun experiences so they won't delete Instagram, so that they will keep using Instagram into their 20s and 30s when they do have a credit card and might be valuable to advertisers. So the idea that there's some pot of gold in teenagers is just wrong based on the data, and you'll hear testimony about that. Your Honor, I've gone a while. I'm happy to take a break now and come back after the lunch break if that's appropriate.
Thank you. That's appropriate. I'm going to give you a paragraph of instruction before you go to lunch. I'm going to ask you, because it's the first day of the trial, I might give you a little bit more time for your lunch break and have you come back at about 1:15. Yes, 1:15. Let me read you this instruction. And it harkens back to the early instruction, the jury selection. As I have already instructed you, jurors may not independently investigate any facts bearing on this case. Many of you use social media or video sharing platforms. You're not being asked to stop your use of social media during the time of this trial. However, until you are excused as a juror or alternate juror, you should not change how you normally use social media, and you should not investigate features that you do not normally use. Do not create new accounts or change your settings to attempt to explore the evidence in this case. Do not look up or research any of the parties or witnesses you may hear from in this case. Do not conduct any research on the internet or otherwise about the facts of this case or about the claims made by the parties. So we'll come back at 1:15. You're excused for lunch.